guys. It's Kim and Tim.
Kim and Tim. Kim and Tim.
Kim and Tim?
I haven't met them.
Tim and
I know
Kim.
Kimberly and Tim.
I know. That was
You
weird.
had to throw back to your childhood.
I did.
Kim.
It would have been Kimmy if it was my childhood. But anyway.
It's Kimmy and Timmy. I was Timmy as a kid.
We're glad to be back.
Yeah,
we're back.
Timmy and Kimmy.
Hope Rescue Podcast. We've been in like a series that I am absolutely loving. I love all the relationship stuff. That's my jam. And so it's so fun to have been diving into this with you. It's been good for us as a couple. We hope that it's been awesome for you as a listener in relationships in your life and how to communicate better. Our first one was talking about how hard it is to say, because we're talking about hard things to say, how to say I'm sorry. The second was tell me more, and that was all about being a good listener. That was an ouch. that whole one was very convicting. Yeah,
I do have some struggles in that arena.
And this one today is a really good one. There's been a big emphasis on it in mental health, in psychology in recent years, and that is on boundaries. And it's interesting because coming from a faith background, the concept of boundaries or healthy protection around your emotional health, people you love, it seems like it's like a big no-no.
Yeah, my parents and your parents being in ministry and pastors, and you just don't say no to people. You may have to say no to your family, but you say no to yes to everybody else.
Thank you for saying that, because it's so true. What I feel like I saw growing up a lot until my dad hit about his 40s is it was no to us as children and having any extracurricular activities or any involvement.
Yeah.
And that's not to slam on my dad. He was a product of how he was raised as well.
Right.
But everything was geared towards the church, and there was nothing about saying yes to individual interests in the family.
Yeah.
And it was something beautiful happened in his life in his early 40s where he realized that he was losing time with us and the opportunity to connect with us. And it was so sweet to watch him make that very difficult adjustment. Actually, in the prime of his pastoral career, he was pastoring the largest church of his lifetime and actually was the biggest church that he'd ever pastored at all, and readjust his priorities to saying no to things that were would fill up his schedule so he could say yes to the things that were most important, which was quality time with his family and investing in relationship with us. So I say that to say that today the hard word is no, but I hope that you can reframe it into saying yes to what's best, not to all the other stuff.
So the word no, the reason it's a hard thing to say is no is because we're talking about setting boundaries, healthy boundaries versus unhealthy boundaries.
Right.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And we want you to get this so well that we're just going to try, hopefully there's not a lot of
it's a pretty simple concept.
Yeah, not grinding it down.
We're going to try to keep it simple.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to say. I can't even say that's in a simple way. But anyway, hard things to say like no. I love you enough to say no. That actually is a valid statement. There are times because you love someone and you want a better relationship with them, you say no to certain things. You're not saying no to them, you're saying no to a certain thing. And I think that's really important. And, I was my kids would probably refer to me as the no dad.
Yeah, you have always referred to yourself as the no dad.
And, kids come and ask a question and go, well, the answer is no. If you need the answer right now, the answer is no. But if you wait a little while,
ruminate,
it might be turned into a yes.
Maybe to a yes.
Yeah. So, So, I think we're not talking about that, saying no to this or that. What we're talking about is saying no to things that are unhealthy,
right.
Saying yes to things that are healthy.
Correct.
And that's what we're talking about when we talk about issues of great harm or great value. We have to sort through those, and we have to understand what our limits are and what our relationship can tolerate and what is important to evaluate. If you say no to everything, you're probably not going to be heard after that. So what you're saying is I need you to stop this behavior. Or these words. They're hurting me. They're hurting us. They're not working for our
Yeah,
relationship.
hurting the relationship. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then let's set some boundaries. Please don't talk to me or treat me that way, is what you're saying. So I think it's really important to be able to say no to people.
Yeah, which, saying no sounds like you're shutting something off, but I love that last point. Let's set some boundaries. So please don't talk to me or treat me that way. It's actually a way for you to maintain a relationship, not eliminate one, is by having some boundaries. So it's not like cutting someone out of your life necessarily, but you're saying you're setting terms for being able to maintain a relationship, some healthy terms.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So what are the things that you think of when you think of people that don't have boundaries?
Unhealthy boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. What are
Any kind of reality show right now, like any Real Housewives of anything, of anywhere, because those are kind of set up as models for communication. Is a lot
like a
of these
train wreck.
shows. It's very entertaining, but like unfortunately, culture, it really does impact us, and they're so messy. The relationships are so messy, and everybody's talking crap about somebody else, and then they're like triangulating relationships and gossiping, and there is no boundaries,
when that whole Housewives franchise started, I don't remember what the first one. Maybe Orange County, was that the first
Jersey,
one?
was it?
No, I don't think Jersey was.
Okay.
Whatever one was first, I don't know. But when I started seeing the Jersey one, I'm like, okay.
Another
I
level.
can't do this.
Flipping tables.
Flipping tables, all of that nonsense.
Teresa.
Yeah, you know these people, don't you? They're your friends.
I remember the table flipping.
But the idea is that people that don't have boundaries become entitled, and they start acting in reckless ways and even toxic ways. So what we want to do is talk about two aspects of this. The first one is setting healthy personal boundaries. We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about setting unhealthy personal boundaries. So when you set unhealthy personal boundaries, your motives are wrong. And so we want to talk first about what's right. And that is, I just wrote this note about boundaries that I think is important. Boundaries are for relationships. If the relationship is toxic, the boundary is simply protective distance. In other words, if I set boundaries in our relationship, it's not that our relationship is over or I'm abusive or Kimberly's abusive. If that were the case, distance would be the boundary. But if I need communication boundaries or respect boundaries or boundaries over time together, boundaries over financial expenditures, those kinds of things, those are healthy boundaries to make our relationship strong. So when we talk about boundaries, we're talking about connecting our relationship.
Right. I was going to say, and when you're doing it as a couple like that, it's important to have it negotiated as a couple, those things.
Yeah.
Like these should be our boundaries, mutual boundaries.
It kind of wouldn't
Not
be
just
boundaries.
me setting boundaries against you,
Yeah.
which I think, in issues of violence or whatever like that, obviously that's like a no-brainer. But you want to negotiate those boundaries as a couple.
Because if it's not really boundaries.
Right.
It's just
Control.
you. Yeah, I mean, I've shared with people many times when a relationship is really on the brink of disaster, and even before that, we'll say, you need to share your non-negotiables. And they need to be those things you just simply cannot tolerate. And it should be maybe 3, 4, 5 things at the most. But you don't just share your non-negotiables, you ask them for theirs. So it is a negotiation.
And
it is a give and take.
Mutually agreed upon.
Yeah, right.
Correct.
And they need to be fair. They need to be reasonable. So don't set boundaries like I need you to, do things that are, not healthy for you.
Right.
That's not good for the relationship.
No.
So we wrote down a few things, 4 things to be exact, of how and what setting healthy boundaries looks like.
Yeah. So if you're in a bad relationship and where there's lack of respect, healthy boundaries can creep can create transparent, values-based relationships. And we just
Yeah.
kind of covered that. So it's a way to be able to reestablish, rebuild the walls of protection around your marriage, is to be able to come together and like we talked about, mutually agree upon some healthy foundational boundaries that you'll both keep for your marriage.
If someone says, I feel like I need to set a boundary, that immediately feels like rejection. But when there is a boundary that is set that is respectful, it's actually, you need to remind the person that you're doing this for the value of the relationship.
Well, here's a good example. So for both of us, we've always had this boundary. Agreeing not to go to lunch in a workplace or a social place with the opposite sex, or even a coffee date. It doesn't matter. For us,
a ride in a car.
That's one of those foundational walls. We've built boundaries, and it might, to some feel like, oh, you're trying to control him or he's trying to control her.
No.
Actually, we're trying to protect our marriage. So that's a mutually agreed upon boundary.
And our reputation.
Yeah.
So,
and how it looks to other people. So, that may not be where you're coming from, but we highly recommend it.
In fact, it's kind of interesting. The world kind of makes fun of that. I'm in a secular job for the most part. And when I say a secular job, it's just not a non-ministry, non-church job. That sounds so weird to say it that way. But anyway, and I don't do it then either. It's respectful to my wife. So, that's why I do it that way.
Right. And then secondly, healthy communication boundaries govern how we talk to each other in a relationship, which is so valuable. And that, of course, involves things like respect and listening, like we talked about last week with each other, and sympathy. So, you create boundaries around what words and what terms are you going to talk to each other in? Are you, when you're angry, going to yell? Well, we set a boundary on we're not going to be yellers.
Yeah.
We're not going to have a culture of yelling in our home.
I told you we're not going to be yellers.
Yeah, so if that means that you take a minute to cool down, you walk around a little bit, you exhale, you do your practice, those things before you can come together and actually have a good conversation. Otherwise, you can blow it up, and so those boundaries create a safety in our relationship to be able to communicate well.
Yeah, I think sometimes even things like teasing can go too far, and especially if it's a sensitive area, to the person you're teasing. If it's a non-sensitive area, probably can be somewhat of a love language, but you got to be careful on that.
Right.
So somebody might say, that hurts me when you do that. Yeah. Would you please not do that anymore? That's a boundary, and there's nothing wrong with that. We know that being teased, and my dad did it, your dad did it, and did it to my mom, and my dad loved my mom, and my father-in-law loved my mother-in-law, but there was teasing that sometimes was...
It was berating.
It was
and
hurtful.
As a child, it felt like this is not loving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it probably just needed to be stated so that it was clear, this is not healthy, or maybe that's not the right word. This is painful to be treated this way.
Yeah.
So please don't talk
observe.
to me that way.
Yeah.
Well, it was as a child hard
Very
for me
big,
to, and I knew my dad loved my mom, but
same.
It just really bugged that, I won't even say things that he said. They're just, and they weren't meant to harm her, because
it was just emotional immaturity, and it was actually like age immaturity. I think as young parents, you're just not thinking about implications long term, and you can establish patterns of behavior that you don't realize will have a long term effect. Yeah. So the quicker you become self aware of those things and self correct, the better.
So the third thing is this, in setting healthy boundaries is, and we already mentioned this, is that it's negotiated. And if it's not negotiable, if it's not something that is a two-way street that you agree on, and it may be that you have to set a boundary that your partner doesn't agree on, and that could be a bigger problem. You may need to get a counselor involved. There are... I knew a lady that went to our church years and years ago when I was a kid, and her husband was trying to get her to go to like strip clubs with him. And she was asking for counsel from my mother and my father. And they got him together and counseled through it. And he realized, gosh, this isn't healthy.
Yeah.
But it was the way he was raised.
Right.
So he just didn't think it was any big deal going to a strip club for him or to bring his wife to it.
Wow.
And both of those were things that were boundaries that were set. And he lived up to that. It changed the nature of their relationship. But think about that. If you don't know any better because you didn't have a dad that taught you the right things,
Right.
you may think that's okay. And so, but sometimes they're not negotiable. And when they're not, that means there's a point of the relationship is at a crisis. So if Kimberly were to say to me, you can't spend all that money because it just, it's putting us in financial jeopardy. And so if you buy a car without talking to me, or if you buy a car we can't afford, or a house, that'd be a problem. We don't do that, by the way.
No, but
we
I was
do
in a marriage
negotiate,
where
but
that happened. I
yeah.
didn't get to be involved in those decisions. They were made for me. So,
It's just unhealthy.
Yeah.
And so if we can't negotiate that means there's something bigger going on.
Right.
But if Kimberly were to say to me, gosh, it would be nice if you would tell me if you're going to spend a couple $1,000s, I'd sure like to know about it. And
Unless
which is
it's a
totally
really beautiful ring for me or something, and then go ahead and surprise me.
even then, well,
No, no boundaries on that one.
Yeah, but you get the point. The point is that, you have to be very careful to listen and to understand what harms or hurts your partner and hear what they have to say. And those boundaries, when they're healthy boundaries, and that's what we're talking about right here, when they're healthy boundaries, they should be adhered to. The fourth and final thing on the healthy boundaries, and then we'll talk about unhealthy, is number 4, healthy boundaries are about the us, not about the me. So this isn't, I'm not setting a boundary on Kimberly because I'm trying to self-protect. I'm actually setting a boundary on Kimberly and myself so that we are protected.
Exactly.
We're protecting the us,
Each other.
protecting our relationship. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. From the very moment that you married, and I know this has a lot to do with marriage, but you could apply this to friendships. You can apply it to work, whatever. It's about the us, and it needs to be about the us and not about the me.
Right.
But the moment you said, I am marrying this person, and you say, I do, the reality is it's about us. It's not about you. And it's very important to set boundaries accordingly. If there's a need for protection, you may have to move to a higher level of involvement from a counselor or maybe more intense negotiation on non-negotiables.
Right.
That's a whole different level. So that's kind of the healthy boundaries. Let's talk about setting unhealthy personal boundaries.
Yeah, so this is setting boundaries out of bad motives. So for instance, your motive is to exclude and not create a healthy relationship between the two of you. As an example, let's just say I'm a woman. If I were to say, you know what, I'm setting a boundary in my marriage and I am taking every Friday night for my girls' night out at the bar with my girlfriends. And this is my boundary I'm setting. This is something that I want and that I need, and I'm doing this for me. And by doing that, you're saying you and my family will not be a part of my Friday night with my girls at the bar. That's an unhealthy boundary.
Yeah, because if
Now-
you're, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but if you're married, that's a negotiation issue.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
should not be at a bar without my wife.
Right. And
With a
I'm
bunch of
saying it
guys.
from a female perspective, but that tends to be
opinion.
more of a guy thing. Well, I need my boys' night out. Well,
Well-
let's talk about that, because maybe your boys' night out could be this Friday night and my girls' night out could be the next week. But for you to say, like, lay down like the law, like, I'm taking every Friday night and I'm going to do what I want for myself, by myself, without you, and you're watching the kids, that's an unhealthy boundary.
Here's one of the things. If I feel kind of strongly about this, and maybe my views are a little narrow, but I don't understand why men need to be. I guess if you're with good men, then it's one thing to be out, but there's some temptations out there.
Of course,
It's
yeah.
better to be with your wife and couples and so forth. But I just really struggle with guys say, I want my guy time. I want my boys and I are going out. We're going to have a good time.
Yeah.
We're going to dance with women and stuff. Okay, I think that's reckless. To
Yeah,
me.
I
But
would be
that's my
careful
opinion.
around that, just because a lot of men are involved in sports and teams, and they
Yeah.
have their guy friends and stuff.
Going
and
out
it's-
for a beer afterwards
it's
or
just
whatever.
it's not
I get it. I
necessarily
get it.
yeah. It's if it's a lifestyle of like a pattern and a lifestyle of wanting to escape out of the family and setting up like this rigid pattern of them getting their time away from you and your kids. That doesn't seem healthy. I think that that's what you look for to one another, saying to your spouse, what do you need in this relationship that will make you feel like you have some time and space cut out for you? What can I do to help facilitate that, instead of it's being like a boundary situation?
Yeah.
And then trying to come alongside each other to give each other some time to do whatever fuels them, art class, whatever, going to Zumba, whatever, I don't know, but just instead of it making like I'm dropping the gauntlet.
Yeah. So that's it. It really has to do with motive. All of these have to do with motive. If you have unhealthy personal boundaries, your motives are skewed. The second thing is your motive is to control your partner. If your motive is to
Right.
control your partner and not develop a healthy relationship, that's a bad motive.
Right.
I don't know. I don't think I try to control Kimberly. I don't want to control Kimberly.
Well, you could try,
I'm
but
having a hard.
it wouldn't go real well.
Yeah, I'm having a hard enough time controlling myself. I don't need to control somebody else. And actually, I'll extend that to if you're trying to control your children. You need to train your children, not control your children, because the minute they're out from under your control,
Right.
they'll do whatever they want.
Right.
So best teach them.
Yeah.
And then finally, your motive is to create a cause for separation or divorce. And you go, what do you mean? So what I do, if somebody wants out of a relationship, and I've seen this happen, I've counseled people that have been doing this, where they want out of the relationship, so they put such strict boundaries on their spouse, so that now they have a cause for divorce, for separation.
The spouse has cause.
Yeah.
That's being controlled. Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean,
I see.
like, so what I'm doing, let's say I say, look, you can't work. If you work outside the home, I don't trust you out there.
Oh, okay.
And then I've set up a situation where if you do what I tell you not to do, then I say, well, you don't want to work with me.
Right.
And I want out of
And
the
I'm out,
relationship. Now, that's probably a bad example, but there are other ways.
It's a
when you
toxic
try to
example,
control
yeah.
someone so that you can set up a cause for divorce, that's a problem. If you go to work and you talk to men at work, I've seen this happen where people go, if you talk to men, a man may say he's jealous. If you talk to men, I'm going to divorce you. Well, that's a boundary that's probably irresponsible if you work with other men, or if you work with men, or if you work with...
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because you're
So-
not going to not talk to the other
Right.
half of the species ever.
Yeah. So the point being on that, when you set up healthy boundaries to control, or help set up unhealthy boundaries to exclude, or unhealthy boundaries to set up failure,
right.
set someone up for failure. And it just happens all the time. We need to be very careful. We need to, it's all about this. It sums up in this one statement. Healthy boundaries are about us and
me.
not about me.
Yeah.
And that's
good.
the key. And I
Boom.
think we need to keep that in mind. So do you love somebody enough to say no to the way they speak, the way they behave, the way they talk to you? Those things are important. So love can be manifest that way, but we can go too far with bad motives and push that person away. So let's be very careful on finding the no in the right way.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, next week, we are going to talk about another hard thing to say, which is, I love you. Now, we don't have a hard time saying that. We say it all the time to each other, and we mean it. But it may be a hard thing to say. We're going to talk about why some people really have a hard time saying, I love you.
Saying it and hearing it.
Yeah, and hearing it. Yeah. So, I know I've known a lot of men who have rarely and in some cases never heard their father say, I love you. My boys say, I love you, Dad. I tell them I love them. The girls do all the time.
Every time they say hi and goodbye.
Yeah, every time. I mean, it's just goes without saying. But that is a really important connection in family, but also in friendship. Yeah. I tell people I work with I love them. I was talking to a couple of guys in other countries, and I'm on a Zoom call with them, and I said, "Man, I just love you guys. Thanks so much for being awesome, guys."
That's awesome.
And it's important to do that. And even it makes them uncomfortable. So what? Anyway, so we're going to talk about that, and we'll continue on this series on hard things to say. Thanks for listening. You're listening to Hope Rescue Podcast at hoperescuepodcast.org.
Bye, guys.